Thank you. Good morning. What was that? Is this thing on? Hi. Hi. I'm Caleb Porzio. I'm a Laravel developer, freelancer, like Frank said, open source maintainer / job quitter. I want to do a quick poll here just to get like a survey of the room. So who here's a Laravel developer? Solid. Okay, who here is like a Laravel adjacent backend full stack developer, Rails, Django, Express, full stack stuff? Okay. All right, decent. So most of the full stack's Laravel. How about like a front end framework like Vue, React, Angular? Okay. Decent amount. Nice. How about jQuery? Any jQuery rollers? Like, oh, I want to raise my hand, but so I love Vue. I love React. I love Angular. But I particularly love Vue. I used to write stuff in jQuery, writing full stack apps, sprinkling in little interactivity around my apps with jQuery. But if you've done that, you know it starts to break down. You're manually wiring everything. You're saying like, get the DOM element, listen for the event, and then manipulate the DOM, and it breaks down. So when I got a hold of Vue, I was like, aha, this is how it should be. I just mess with the data, and then the template reacts to it. It's declarative. I fell in love. But I fell in love too much. I started, like, Vue tends to breed, like React, all those things. Like, you make a component, maybe you replace a bit of jQuery with a component, and then you make another one, and they want to talk to each other, so you wrap them up in a bigger one, and you keep doing that until your entire front end is written in JavaScript. And why is that too much? Why is that a problem? I'm making it sound like a problem. Like I said, Vue's great. Why would that be a problem? Well, basically, I kind of noticed that in my own developer life that productivity started to do this. I was making fancier UIs, and sometimes that was necessary, and sometimes maybe it wasn't, but my productivity was doing this. Because, here's the best way I can put it. I had all these slides, I'm going to list out like all the reasons, very technical. Here's the broad umbrella reason. 2 code bases. Before I was managing 1 code base. It was PHP, from database to templating. And now, it was subtle, but as I moved my entire templating section, the whole front end of my app, into JavaScript, I'm now managing 2 systems. 2 different languages, 2 different package managers, 2 different ecosystems, 2 different conferences, like 2 different systems completely. And it's not just 1 plus 1. You also have to like write the code for those 2 things to talk to each other. All that glue code, right? So the big question, the thing that I've been searching for the past 2 years, is how do we build dynamic front ends without managing 2 code bases? So how do I maintain the simplicity that I had before where I'm slinging code, I'm writing like queries right in my templates? That's not good, but I'm just saying, like, you could do it, and now you totally can. So how can I redeem some of that without managing 2 code bases, without all the complexity? So I have an answer. It's not the answer, but this is one answer, and this is what we're going to talk about for the rest of the talk. Server-fetched partials. This is a pattern. Has anybody heard of this pattern? Nice. I invented the name, so that was... I guess I wasn't trolling you, because you probably know what this means, but really, so I invented this, I don't know, and basically it's a fancy word for Ajaxing HTML instead of JSON. I didn't invent this. And so this seems kind of weird, but for me, like, I thought, if you Ajax something, you're only going to Ajax JSON, but I saw this blog post by DHH where he's like, well, why don't you just Ajax pre-rendered HTML instead of doing the rendering on the front end? And it blew my mind. So credit to DHH and the Rails community, because they've been doing this forever, and it's pretty baller. So DHH says, it allows us to party with productivity like the days of yore. And this really resonated with me because that's what I feel like. I feel like I was so productive before. Now I have all these fancy tools and they're great, but I'm just not as productive as I was before. So let's dig in. Okay. So here's a little demo app. This is just like a dashboard, nothing fancy. When I click a link, it's a full, good old-fashioned full page reload, with a loading spinner and everything. So invoices, this invoices page, this is going to be the muse for our exploration today. So I'm going to start by implementing this invoices page. We're going to kind of establish a common ground. I'm going to implement this in classic MVC fashion, good old-fashioned model view controller. So this is Laravel. If you're not familiar with Laravel, if maybe you know Rails or something, it should be pretty familiar. This is the routes file of Laravel where we're saying, hey, if you hit the invoices endpoint, return a view. Super simple. So let's open up that view. Oh no. Okay. So here's the view, HTML. And if you want to render something in the view, in our case, let's say we want to render invoices. So this is Blade, which is a templating engine in PHP. So think back-end PHP templates. So I'm looping through the invoices. I'm showing a title. I'm showing an invoice amount. I'm decorating it a bit. But we need to pass that data into the view. So again, MVC. Let's do that. Okay, so I'm grabbing the invoices from the database with Laravel, shoving it into the view, accessing it right here, and rendering it out. All back-end templated. Everybody tracking here? Does this look familiar? This looks good? A little nod? Okay, a couple people. There we go. An invoices page. We're done. So we have a basic, back-end, and an invoices page. And this is good. This is good enough. Let's finish the piece of the puzzle here, and let's actually write a test for this. So this is another thing I love about the days of yore, as DHH says. Testing is just so straightforward, and Laravel makes it so easy. So like in Laravel, when I'm running a test, it's creating a temporary database, SQLite in-memory database. It's migrating everything for my test, and then it destroys it all after. So my test productivity is like through the roof. So I can factory up an invoice, just create an invoice with an amount of 500, all just for this test. And I can make this quick assertion that's like, hey, when you hit the invoices endpoint, make sure that you see $500. Okay, I run the test, and we're green, super fast, and I tested the entire stack. Like what happened just here is kind of significant. I wrote a test that exercised the entire stack from the database query all the way to the rendered HTML. Just to prove to you that I'm not joshing you, if I change that to 400, it's like, hey, failed asserting that all this rendered HTML contains $400. It contains 5. Nice. So that's good. And this is the way that I love writing pages, because again, it's just so darn productive. But let's introduce the conflict of the story. So in the routes file, let's just say that we're actually fetching these invoices from Stripe. And it takes like 2 or 3 seconds. So this is a real example. I was working on an app, and I had gone like way into Vue, and the whole front end was Vue, and I was trying to step back. So I was writing this dashboard, just like the one we're writing. And when I got to the invoices page, it was pulling directly from Stripe. I was like, man, I made it this far. I've been defeated. Now I have to introduce Vue.js. Now I have to like make a loading spinner, do a this.loading equals true, and then fetch it over JSON, and then render the whole template. That's what I thought. So check this out. Here's the user scrolling around the page, going to invoices and going, oh man, this app is so horrible. So we don't want that for our users. Okay, so at this point in time, I'm going to freeze our code base. I wrote this is just an alias. It's not anything fancy. Because we're going to come back to this point in time. But first, I want to go down the hole of implementing this in Vue.js to really exercise what the alternative is like. So let's go ahead and fully implement this functionality in Vue.js where we hit a JSON endpoint and do the whole thing. Then we're going to back out and do server-fetched partials and see if we got any better. Okay, so for starters, we have an API endpoint for our Vue component right here. So here's this new endpoint that I created in the background, and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, API/invoices, just a bunch of JSON. And now here, instead of doing all this stuff that we were doing, I can get rid of that. I can get rid of passing the data in, and we can just pass in a Vue component. So check this out. So all this templating that I was doing in the back end, we'll get rid of it, and we'll just load a, oops, not that. And we'll load a Vue component. I already created the Vue component, so we should just be able to refresh the page and get ourselves a nice Vue component. So check that out. Loading spinner, bunch of data. Does this look familiar, anybody? This kind of like setup, you just render a template, or you render like a Vue component, it fetches data from JSON and then loads. Have some loading spinner, some loading state. Cool. So let's take a look at the actual invoices Vue component. Okay. So if you're not familiar with Vue, it's pretty similar to Angular in the templating way, but similar to React too. They all kind of work the same. These components, there's state, and then there's a template with a virtual DOM and yada, yada, yada. So here's our data for the Vue component. We have this invoices piece of data, and then a lifecycle hook called created, which is saying, hey, when the Vue component loads on the page, fire this code, and the code is using Axios to make an AJAX request to that API endpoint. When we get it back, we're storing it inside invoices. Make sense? And then here's the template portion. This would be your render function with JSX for anybody in React. So here we have a loading spinner, and we're saying vif, so if invoices.length is 0. So if there's no invoices, show the loading spinner. Else, so when there are invoices, once the AJAX request comes back, just do a little bit of templating, loop through the invoices, and we're good to go. Simple, straightforward. It doesn't seem like we lost that much. Like I'm talking about this Vue.js and this JavaScript badness. But this is pretty good. Like it's clean and it's nice, and like I said, Vue's a great way to write front ends. Well, let's look at the testing of this, and maybe this will expose some of the problems with this paradigm. So this test isn't going to work anymore because it's saying, hey, I don't see $500, I just see your invoices tag. Because it's a backend test, it's PHP. It doesn't speak JavaScript. So with our backend test, we have to now reduce it to just testing our API. So no problem, let's make a little test. Test can fetch invoices, we create an invoice, and now we'll hit an API endpoint and assert a JSON fragment. Okay, run the test, it's gonna wait 2 seconds because of our sleep, and now it's passing. So pretty good. We have another test, and it's good, and it's easy, and whatnot, but we've only tested from the database to the API endpoint. We've moved all the templating, we've moved that out of our testing umbrella, and now it's completely untested. So how do we solve that? We write a Jest test. So this is a JavaScript test written in Jest, and I'm mocking out Axios. So here's my Axios mock, and I'm saying, hey, Jest, when you come across Axios, stub out this get method and return this little invoice snippet. So this is like dummy code, or like a stub. And then here's the test itself. Really simple. Mount the invoices component, render view, get the HTML that's all rendered, and assert that it contains $500. So pretty much kind of what we were doing before, but we split it in two. So let's run this test. With any luck, we get passing. Nice. So it seems like we have everything tested. Like we made a little bit more work for ourselves, but we tested it. We just had to do it in 2 places, but it seems like everything's tested. Let's check out a problem with this. Okay, so going back down to our API test, let's completely break the API. So this is broken in real life because I just broke the API. So hopefully one of these tests fails. One of them should fail. Okay, and we get our failure. It says fail asserting that false is true. That's good. And let's say that you're a developer and you go and you change something, you break the test, and now you want to fix the test, but you fix it in some different way. So let's change the schema here. Okay, so because my test is flexible enough, it accepts the schema difference, but just pretend that what I'm trying to replicate is the scenario where something goes wrong in your app, a test fails, so you fix the test, but something else somewhere else breaks. Has anybody run into that? Where that happens in programming? Yeah, so we're back to it. Both tests are passing, right? Our back-end test is passing, and our front-end test is passing. Okay, is this thing on? I feel like it's falling off. All right, so both tests are passing, and okay, we're good. Both tests passing. Does it work in real life? No, it does not work in real life, but we have both tests passing, and how is that possible? That shouldn't be possible. And the reason that's possible is because we're relying on a mock. Our front-end test is relying on something that's not real. So this whole mock right here, this ID and this amount, is totally not real. It's just our replication of what the real life should be. So to fully test this, we would need to use a contract test, or Selenium, or something that tests the whole system as a whole, which is just a ton of complexity, because we've created a seam here, right? And I didn't even mention all the complexity that goes into setting all this up. Like, there's Webpack, there's a watcher, there's hot module replacement, there's NPM, dependency hell, there's all sorts of things. There's Jest, there's setting Jest up, there's configuring Babel. Jest runs in Node, so you have to know Node and require, but there's, I could just keep going on and on and on. Maybe you're using TypeScript, and who knows. So anyway, it's a lot. So this is the point, this is the height of the conflict where you should feel exhausted and go, oh my gosh, this is just so much. So let's thaw out that place where we were before. So the simpler time where it takes 2 seconds to load and we have our page. Okay, load our routes file, load our view. Okay, so we're back here. Now here comes the hero of the story, server fetched partials. This is that thing that I was telling you about that's going to change all our lives. Here we go. So the concept is, before we made an API endpoint for JSON, right? So instead of that, we're going to make an API endpoint that just returns this partial. So let's do that. So partial. So here's an endpoint called invoices partial that returns a view called invoices partial. So we'll extract all this out into a separate view called invoices partial. Okay? And now in its place, we'll just put a little loading spinner. Great. So there's our loading spinner. We can get rid of this stuff here. It's just loading a loading spinner. Okay. So now we've done kind of a similar thing where we've separated it out into two endpoints. The first endpoint is just a dumb loading spinner, and the second endpoint is this invoices partial, which again, it's like instead of getting the JSON, we can get the actual template for the invoices. So it's just HTML. And our goal here is to basically make an AJAX request, fetch that HTML, and swap it into the page. So we're going to do some stuff that is going to feel pretty classic. We're going to write an inline script tag. I know. Okay, and here's where we're going to do our work. We'll use axios.get invoices partial. So hit that endpoint. We get it back. And now we'll use document.querySelector to get this element. And we'll say, hey, Axios, when you get the HTML response back, replace the entire loading spinner with what you got back. .inner HTML. .inner HTML. I felt like that was a sin, but I don't know. It's great. It works fine. So .inner HTML, response.data. All right, so this is it. Get ready. We've written 3 lines of JavaScript. No logic, just one AJAX request. Refresh the page. 2 seconds, and bam. So this is a big moment, by the way. If you're not clapping inside, you should be clapping in real life. Nice. So this is a big moment because we just exactly replicated what we did before, except without any of that extra complexity with like ye old server rendered template, right? So what about testing? Let's go back to our test. And so this test is going to fail, but we can just change it to fetch the invoices partial. Run this test, and bada bing. So we have the same awesome testing setup where we can use Laravel and do these factories and all that stuff and exercise it all beautifully and simply. This test runs from the database query all the way to the templating, and we still get the exact front-end behavior that we had before. Okay, granted, this is a simple example, a quick deferred loading. Let's spice it up just a little bit and do something fun. So let's paginate these results. We'll only show 5 at a time, and then we'll have a little show more button below it. Cool. So Laravel makes pagination awesome. This is built in Laravel. I can just say paginate. And then let's go to our partial. And inside of our partial, oops. Okay. And then inside of our partial, we're going to make our show more button. Okay. Check it out. Load the page, spinner for 2 seconds. Now we have our show more button after this pagination. So here's what we're going to do. This is kind of crazy. I'm going to do another thing that you might think is a sin. Look at that. Just look at it. Isn't it beautiful? Now look at this. On-click handler with multi-line JavaScript. I know. I was writing this talk and I'm like, I can do that, right? Like there's nothing wrong with that. Why not? On-click works everywhere. On-click is great. Okay. So we want to set a loading spinner. This is why on-click is great. You have access to this, which is the element that the thing was clicked on. This.classList, class list, another good native DOM API that's widely supported. .add is loading. So there's our loading state. Now let's do an Axios call. Axios.get. And now at this point, we want to call invoices partial, but we want to call the next page. So we could do that and manage which page we're on and add 1 to it and whatever. But this is an example where Laravel's just so good at this stuff anyway that I can call invoices, next page, URL, all built in Laravel. And Laravel's just going to have that next page ready for us. All right. Then we get the response back. Okay. We'll use this outer HTML, and I'll explain that in a second. Response.data. Close that up. Okay. So let's walk through what's happening here. We have our show more button. We have our on-click handler. We're adding a loading spinner when the user clicks. Then we're fetching out to this endpoint to get this partial, and we're going to swap it in and replace this entire element, which is going to replace it with this entire include, which will then have its own show more button, and so on and so forth ad infinitum. Refresh the page. We're looking good. Show more, loading spinner. Bam, another set. Nice. So simple, so serene. Okay. Great, and our test is still covered. All the templating is still covered by our test. So that's really fancy. Let's amp it one step further, the same exact principle here. So Turbolinks. Who here's heard of Turbolinks? Okay, decent amount. Turbolinks is a tool by the Rails community. It's been out forever. Like I said, the Rails community has been all over this practice for basically ever, and I'm just figuring out about it in the last couple of years. This is the description. It's very Basecamp. Turbolinks makes navigating your web application faster. I couldn't have said it more simply. All right, so that's what it does. Turbolinks basically turns your application, your classic server-side application, into an SPA for free. So watch this. I'm going to give you the Turbolinks intro tutorial. We're going to install it. We're going to set it up. We're going to use it. And it's going to take me 4 seconds. Layout. Here's the head section. Include Turbolinks. That's it. We're done. There's no magic here. I literally am including the turbolinks.js distribution file. Refresh the page. We're back to where we were. Now check this out. I change pages. It's super fast. There's no loading spinner. It's not a full page reload. It even updates the history API. Take a look at our AJAX requests. Bam. So Turbolinks is hijacking every link tag in our app, and it's basically saying, hey, like browser, don't actually follow this link. I'll fetch it over AJAX. Once I get it, I'll just swap in the body. So things feel really fast because you're not re-rendering the whole page. So Turbolinks is pretty awesome if you haven't encountered it. Really cool. You can do all sorts of cool stuff like prefetching and whatnot. Cool. So this is really good. Let's take it. So this is the part of the talk where we take a breather and we go, okay, server fetched partials. This is kind of an interesting idea. Feels a little weird though. I still, this isn't stuff people are talking about at other conferences. This isn't mainline stuff. This is interesting and cool, but come on, this is, you're just one guy on a stage who feels kind of strongly about this obscure thing and is saying that we shouldn't be writing Vue SBAs, but everywhere else says we should, and I need to get a job, and half the jobs are about Vue and React and whatnot. Okay, well, I tell you, and does it scale? Okay, maybe in a pet project when you need to load an invoices page that takes 2 seconds. But does it scale? Can we use this in a bigger context? This is a magic trick. I'm leading you somewhere if you can't tell. I ask you to look no further than GitHub. Next time you go on GitHub, open up the AJAX request. One guy's nodding. He's like, oh yeah, I know what's about to happen. Yeah. So you go on GitHub. You go anywhere. When you switch tabs on GitHub, by the way, the tab switching is basically like Turbolinks. Everything you hover over, I'm going to hover over a title, AJAX request. I hover over this dropdown, AJAX, 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 AJAX. Look at these requests. They're HTML partials, and they're being swapped in. GitHub is not an SPA. It's a Rails app that uses this tool called PJAX, which fetches these partials and swaps them into the page all over the freaking place. Which, when I saw this, my world went crazy. I was like, this is the future to me. Okay. And GitHub has no plans of changing this. There's conversations on Twitter when's GitHub going to turn into an SPA and blah, blah, blah. And we're super productive, man. They are charging forward and making it happen, building an API or a UI that looks and feels great with this kind of weird technology, this weird tactic that allows you to use all this back-end goodness. Cool. All right. Now's the part of the talk where I want to show you this Livewire thing that I quit my job for that is kind of weird, and especially if you're not in the Laravel community, it's going to be really, really weird. And this isn't a Livewire talk, so I don't have enough time to thoroughly walk you through and wade you into the waters so that you see it necessarily. I'm just going to throw it at you. So you'll probably be a little confused, but hopefully a little bit intrigued. Definitely a little bit of both. Okay. So in January, I saw this blog post about Phoenix LiveView. So Phoenix is a framework for Elixir. LiveView is a tool that they built and released at ElixirConf. Phoenix LiveView, interactive real-time apps, no need to write JavaScript. My interest is piqued. So here it is. They show this little GIF, and he's got this thermostat, and he's clicking around on it. And this looks good. I could write this myself in Vue. And he says, all this stuff is done without JavaScript. Okay, that's weird. And then he shows the code for it. And he has a template here. I don't speak Elixir, but it's similar enough to Blade that I can see that this is a backend template where he's echoing a value in the backend, but somehow he's listening for a click in the front end like you would with Vue, and then firing a method that exists on the backend, which is totally bonkers. And so I dug a little bit into it, and this works exactly the way that everything else I've been showing you works. Something happens on the front end, it sends a request to the server, hydrates some state, loads some HTML, swaps it back into the front end, but with way more fanciness. And I thought, well, I got to try to build this in Laravel. So mine is a little bit different than LiveView. It's taken on a shape of its own, but Livewire is basically that for Laravel. And if you're in the Laravel community, good news. You can use this. You can go compose or require this. If you're not in the Laravel community, maybe you need to build something like this for your community. This is kind of a class of tools that I think is going to start emerging and we'll see more and more of. And you could be the guy. All right. So let's actually do this. Let's use Livewire to accomplish some things. So I could use Livewire to replicate this behavior, but that's kind of boring because I feel like what we did is really good. But let's take it up a notch. Let's say we want to add a search bar here so that when you search, you're filtering the invoices. That's something that you could picture how we would do that the way we've been doing things. You could do document.querySelector, search bar, whatever, .addEventListener, input, listen for an event, maybe you'd have to debounce the input. It would be a lot of wiring DOM up, and I'd feel like I'm back using jQuery, and I just wouldn't feel good about it. So that's where Livewire comes in and makes this stuff better. And then again, you're doing a lot like of front-end logic that's untested and yada yada. All right, so let's pull in Livewire. If you use Laravel, Livewire is a quick composer require Livewire. I already did that here. And I can basically add all the assets like this, Livewire assets. And I'm going to comment out these things. Okay, so now we have just Livewire installed. And let's go back to our original template where we had that loading spinner and then our partial stuff. Delete it. Okay, and now we're going to use Livewire. Livewire components, think Vue components, think React components. It works in components. It's very similar to Vue and React. It should feel similar. So Livewire invoices, all right, just kind of how we had our invoices Vue component. Great. And now every Livewire component consists of 2 files because we don't really have JSX in PHP. So there's the class, which is invoices.php, okay? And it has one render method by default, and it returns instead of JSX, a view, and we can open up that view over here, invoices, blade.php, all right, and it's the plain HTML view. Now check this out. Okay, it's loaded on the page. This is Livewire. Cool thing about technologies like this is it's server-side rendering out of the box because it's like old school server-side rendering, like just a server rendering HTML. So the first, load has all the HTML. There's no little blip. It's SEO friendly. So those are just nice perks of a paradigm like this. Okay, now here comes the magic. Let's make it track some state. So in Vue, you might do something like vModel, right? In Livewire, we'll do wireModel equals search. So we'll track a piece of data called search. We can add that piece of data by setting it as a public property on the class. Search equals, we'll make it hey there. Okay, and now let's echo out that search variable right here. Bam, okay. So check it out, it's already synchronized, like it just happened. And then, hey there, you. And it synchronizes. And what happens in the back end? It sends an AJAX request, hydrates some data, and spits out a bunch of DOM. And then Livewire is smart enough to do a DOM diff and only swap in the things that changed and whatnot. And it automatically debounces input, so I'm not sending an AJAX request on every single keystroke. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Let's apply this to what we've been working on, invoices. So here's our normal backend template that we've been using, because it's just backend code. And now let's pass invoices into the view. And again, this is kind of feels, it's like this weird hybrid between MVC and componentized frameworks, whatever. So here I can pass in invoices like I did in the controller. And let's see what that looks like. All right, but it's dumb. We enter stuff in and nothing happens. So let's do that. Instead of all, we'll say search. And then you can pass in a string to search, and that'll be the piece of data. So let's walk through this really quickly. Basically, when we type in here, it's going to synchronize search with this value as it sends the request to the server. The server's going to render the component, load only the invoices that fall under the search. Refresh the page, and there we go. We have live searching, and it's all very magical, and it's all back-end. Time's running short. How do we test this? So testing, this is why a tool like Livewire is really awesome, because all this functionality you can test in normal back-end testing, same way I did before. Factory up an invoice, load up my Livewire component, and run a test against it. Passes really fast. Okay? Let's do the same thing again, and here's the crazy thing, we can actually test behavior. We'll say load up the component, assert that we see 500, set the search to 400, which should show nothing, and assert that we don't see 500. And there we go. Awesome. So that's Livewire. It basically allows you to do some pretty crazy things, but it all works with that same fundamental concept of server-fetched partials that you can use in any of your apps right now as a concept however you want. You can scale it from this little, like, let's just do a deferred loading, to this, whoa, let's write an entire SPA with this principle. Cool. So I wrote Livewire. Check it out. I also host a podcast where I talk about building it. Also check me out on Twitter. I spend a bunch of time there talking about code and stuff and arguing about writing less JavaScript. And No Plans to Merge is a podcast that I host with my buddy Daniel. And it's pretty awesome. We talk about code every week, and it's really fun. Our last episode is called Arguing About Writing Less JS. So if you're interested in that, definitely check it out. And that's where I'm at. Thank you so much for everything. I hope you all become more productive and embrace some of these concepts, or just at least maybe think twice before writing a big Vue SPA. I'm not anti-SPA. I'm anti-unnecessary complexity. Write less JS. Thank you.